Live from Rotary Hall in Rockwall, Texas, this is a special edition of the Bunker Bob Show, and I am glad that you have had the chance to make it today at this really exciting day, because again, whenever we have a sitting member of Congress who is coming before his constituents, it's always a good thing, because open and transparent government is what we all want as people who believe in limited government and representative government. And certainly Pat Fallon is one of those individuals that has done a great job of making sure that we, the people, are heard and represented. So far, Congressman Fallon has done an excellent job. As far as voting goes, he's had a very conservative record. There are some issues, and I'm going to have the opportunity to sit down with Congressman Fallon in just a few minutes right before he starts the town hall, and there are a couple of issues that I'll be asking him about. And again, one of the things that those of you who watch the show, who communicate with me, who email me, message me, you give me ideas on the kinds of questions to ask, and one of them is going to be a hard-hitting question related to ethics issues and his reporting of stock purchases. And if you're familiar with how Congress works, Congress has somewhat of inside information when it comes to stocks. The issue that was brought up is that Congressman Fallon didn't report some of his stock holdings, which is a violation of congressional ethics. And so the question is, did his influence or does his knowledge of what he does in Congress have anything to do with it? And the long and short answer to that is no. I can already say that. So the issue isn't whether or not Congressman Fallon had done something wrong. The issue is what happened. Why did you not report that? And it has been reported in the press. And I think that's a question that deserves answering. And so I'll be asking him about that. I'm also going to be asking, obviously, about what's going on in Afghanistan. And Congress is very involved in that. It is surprising that even the press, even CNN, is not giving Joe Biden the kind of cover that he's used to, and the left is trying to rally around the president. Joe Biden has said that he would not do anything. You know, he doesn't regret his decision, even though we have Americans whose lives are at risk. Literally, we have many people who have worked with our soldiers, interpreters, people like that who have helped America, whose lives are at best in peril. And so these are some of the questions that really do need to be answered. And I think that Congress is one of those check and balances where they've got to hold the president accountable. So I have a very specific question for Congressman Fallon, and it has to do with something that Mark Levin has been talking about. If you listen to Mark Levin or watch his show, as I do, then you know exactly the question I'm going to ask him, and I suspect he probably does too. By the way, I've not given Congressman Fallon any of the questions I'm going to be asking, so this is going to be straight questions. The town hall is scheduled to begin at 2:30. It is almost that time, and the congressman has been good enough to give me 5 or 10 minutes before he addresses his constituents, and so I'm looking forward to that. It looks like that he has arrived, or he's pulling in now. So in just a few minutes, Congressman will be sitting down with me. I think that some of the people that are most disgruntled with Congressman Fallon would be those who believe in big government, those who believe in what President Biden is doing. And I've asked his staff how the other town halls have gone. This, I believe, is one of 6 or 7 town halls that he is doing. He's doing another one later tonight. I believe it's 6, and I think it's in Sulphur Springs. I could be wrong. But I've asked how they've gone, and so far apparently they've gone pretty well. So that's an interesting thing, because there are a lot of liberals in Rockwall County, or in East Texas, because so many people have been moving from California and from the left coast. It's not surprising when we do have people who just want to cause trouble, who just don't really care about what a person's position is. If they don't like them, they're not going to listen to anything they have to say. But as I've said from the very beginning, the reason I do this show is to hold those Republicans who say that they're Republicans accountable to what they say they're going to do. I've got Congressman Fallon's his campaign information. I keep that whenever I have an interview with the congressman. I keep that handy so that I can say, no, you said you believe in cutting taxes, protecting innocent life, celebrating religious liberty, among other things, and so if he does anything that violates the things that he has campaigned on, I certainly will hit him for that. But if there's things that are in the Republican platform that we Republicans have come together and created that platform and said, these are the values that we believe in, and he votes in a different direction. He does not vote in a consistent manner with what our platform says, then I'm going to hold him accountable as well. I realize that there are people out there, some of the viewers of my show, who don't like Congressman Fallon for a lot of other reasons, superfluous to his voting record. But the only thing that I care about, I'm just being honest, is the only thing I care about any individual who is in public office is how they vote. What is their voting record? Donald Trump was probably not the most moral president that we ever had, but he was one of the greatest presidents that we've ever had, because he did exactly what he said he's going to do. So I don't care, how you look at someone's personal life, and again, there's nothing in his personal life, that Congressman Fallon's personal life, that anyone can question, that I am aware of. But that's my point. It's not about someone's personal life. It's about how are they voting, how are they representing the people of Rockwall County, specifically this congressional district. And so the other question that I'm going to be hitting him with, if we have time, because he's on a very tight schedule, and his staff is doing a very good job of trying to keep him on schedule. And as with any politician, when he gets with and I don't mean to use the word in a derogatory way, politician. I mean anyone who's elected to office. He's going to probably want to spend some time with his constituents. Every elected official wants to do that, and so obviously he can be late to certain things, but they're going to keep me on time and on schedule, and so I'll ask as many questions as I can, and try and get those questions answered. And so I am curious when a member of Congress, when someone is elected to Congress, as much as they think they know about how the proverbial sausage is made, there's got to be surprises. So I'm curious to know what have been the biggest surprises now that he is in office, because some people will say, and when you read the memoirs of other members of Congress or the Senate or the president, they will tell you that the first year was just a big learning curve and trying to understand the system, that even some will say it takes multiple years, which is a real shame, because I'm a big believer in term limits. And what that means and what that says to me is, if it takes so long to really get up to speed on how the proverbial sausage is made, then our system is not working as it should. It should be a simple system, and unfortunately, that just doesn't happen very much anymore. One of the interesting things is I saw David Peake who's an elected official here in Rockwall County. I just asked him if he thought that the county was going to raise taxes. He said no, not raise taxes, probably lower taxes. But it doesn't mean that your taxes won't rise because of the property tax assessments continue to go up. But there is one city that is raising taxes, not by a little, by a significant amount, to grow in the size and scope of government. And I'll be doing a show specifically on that city. And I do have some members of different city councils from different cities in Rockwall County that are that I'm going to have on the show in the next few weeks. Now that budget season is coming to a close, we'll talk about what's in their budgets and how their governments, their city governments, are growing or getting smaller, and how efficiencies in government are taking place. You know, that's the one thing about government is that as in the private sector, and if you've never owned a business, if you've never signed the front of a paycheck, it's hard to understand that the one cost that is most easy, the best way to control cost is employees, and you only take on an employee if it's absolutely necessary. That's why small businesses don't just flood themselves with a bunch of employees. They try to do as much as they can. They work long hours. Business owners work long hours because they want to maximize profit. Government has a very different point of view with that. Government believes that more employees will better serve the people. But the fact of the matter is, employees in government create nothing. They generate nothing. No revenue comes from employees of government. And so for a government to take on a new employee, you've got to understand, once they take on that employee, that employee will be there forever. Yeah, they will never get rid of those employees. And it is one of the best ways to constrain the size and scope of government. But we see government right here in Rockwall County growing exponentially. Okay, they are doing the pledge, so I'm going to move it over there.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
Okay, so the pledge is, okay, they're going to do an invocation.
God, we earnestly seek you. We acknowledge your holiness, and we humble ourselves before you and ask that you would heal our land. We ask that you would give us our daily needs, have your will done. Forgive us of our mistakes. Remind us to forgive others. Keep us far from temptation and evil. God, we ask that District 4 would begin to unite, to coalesce, that we would encourage one another, that we would stand behind our leaders, especially Congressman Pat Fallon, and that you would give to him and to all of us the wisdom of the prophets, the compassion of the Good Samaritan, and at times when necessary, the smooth stones to slay giants. Unite us, inspire us. Let us hold up each other's arms in the long day of battle, and may we maybe be a change agent. May we encourage other districts, maybe the state, maybe the country, maybe the world. We thank you for hearing this invocation in our prayer, and we ask all these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Amen.
Okay, the invocation has now been finished, and the pledge to the flag has been finished as well, and they are now doing just basically introductions of different elected officials. And so we're waiting for the congressman to come in. And Congressman is here, and so I do see him. So I'm thinking that he's going to be heading over here shortly, and it doesn't look like we're going to get him after all. So he's going to go ahead and start with the town hall. I think he's going to start with town hall. So which is fine. We don't want to take away from the people the opportunity for them to ask him questions, and so he'll probably come afterward, which is good, and we're looking forward to that. So I'm going to hand the program back over to the town hall, and so we're going to be focusing on I'm just making sure that, yes, we're getting, let me move it back over there. So,
Lamar, Marion, Morris, Rains, Red River, Rockwall, Titus, and Upshur. Prior to his time in the Texas Senate and the House, Pat enjoyed a decades-long successful entrepreneurial career, having founded over a dozen successful companies. To raise funds and awareness for pediatric cancer research, Pat entered what has been billed as the world's greatest endurance challenge in 2016. He completed the World Marathon Challenge, a race where competitors attempt to run 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. On January 29, 2016, becoming just the 115th person in the world to do so successfully. He's also the first, and still only today, person to finish the World Marathon Challenge with no previous marathon experience. Congressman Fallon is a proud graduate of the University of Notre Dame, where he played varsity football under legendary coach Lou Holtz and was a member of the 1988 National Championship team. Upon graduation, Pat received a commission to serve as an officer of the United States Air Force, where he was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base at Wichita Falls, Texas. Pat has been happily married to his lovely wife Susan for 16 years, and they have 2 boys, Thomas 14 and Mac 11. Folks, let's welcome someone that we all know and truly treasure, Congressman Pat Fallon.
When you stand up like that, I'm looking for somebody very impressive, not myself. Please sit. You know, the judge mentioned the marathons, and before that occurred, one of the reasons why, the main reason we did it was we wanted to run for a little boy who was fighting for his life with pediatric cancer. And at the time, I was 30 pounds heavier than I am today. And it's amazing how your children humble you. I was running for city council in 2009, and my wife was also pregnant with our youngest child. And we were teaching my oldest, who was about 3, just not quite, what was in mommy's belly. It was his brother, and it was a baby. So we trained him to say, rub mom's belly, and that's your brother, baby. He's so adorably cute. He'd walk up and say, mommy, baby. You say, yes, Thomas, good boy. Well, when you run for office sometimes, you're not getting a lot of cardio. Even if you go knock on doors, while that might be effective and exhausting and very rewarding, you're not burning a lot of calories. You're expending energy, but not in the sense of the calories. So you get at least I do, I tend to get a little heavier. And I got a bit heavier back then in 09. And I was sitting down at my desk, working on some things, about 8 o'clock at night, when my oldest was going to go to bed, and he saw my gut, and he walked up to me and rubbed it and said, baby. I said, it might be time to start running more than just mailboxes. I might have to run a few mailboxes or a few miles. But the other thing I love about the campaign trail is town halls are wonderful. I want to thank you all for coming. Knocking on doors, there's 2 ways, in my humble opinion, there's 2 ways to really put your hand on the pulse of the district that you want to represent, the 2 best ways. And that is knock on doors and talk to folks in their own castle, where they feel the most comfortable. And also have town halls where people can ask any question they like. We've had 6 town halls in the last 2 days. We're going to have 2 more today, because we promised to do at least 2 town halls in all 18 counties every year. There's 36 at least town halls. And the last, I think maybe all 3, we had enough time where we took every question. There was one question that went unasked. Sometimes, when time's compressed, that's not possible. We try to get as many as possible. But I was so happy with yesterday, because they said, we don't have any more questions. I said, really? Wow, my wife never says that to me. But when you knock on doors, you get a real good flavor for the district or the city or in Texas, in the state that you want to represent. And I remember being up in Sanger, Texas. I was running for state representative in 2011 and 12. And I met this fella. Now, I do this little thing where we grade every voter. I mean, you've never missed an election. We apply points to every election, and it becomes a language that you speak. And it depends on the election. Sometimes, like the perfect election race, this person hasn't missed in the last 10 years. It's like a point value, say 78. So if you have a 78, and you knock on their door, and they say, come on in, you go on in. If they say, why don't you stay for dinner, I ask, are you serving meatloaf? You know, you want to stay for a movie? Yeah. Does this couch pull out? I mean, you stay. Because they're voting, and they tend to influence folks. And in Texas, with Republican primary voters, they tend to be pretty darn conservative. And I fancy myself in that mold. So I'm talking to this one guy, and we are hitting it off. Just going back and forth, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a great guy, probably going to support her. Might even take a yard. And then he did tell me this. You know, one thing I got to tell you, you little older gentleman, I don't believe in the electric chair. Which that just surprised me. I'm like, oh, he's not a death penalty advocate. And he said, no, son, I believe in the electric bench. Have 5 or 6 of them sit down there at once. Save some energy. That'll be green. You can't make this stuff up. It's just nuts and things indoors. But another one in Sanger was a rich bevy of memories. But this one fella said, and it really stuck with me, and it's very poignant and simple. He got passionate. He said, I like it when people that want to work for me come and interview with me. I go, well, you're one of my bosses. I want to be a potential anyway. And he said, I got a question for you. Why aren't we teaching English in our schools? You know, he's referring to not English immersion, but bilingual education. And he said, they are teaching English in interior China. Why can't we teach it in Dallas? Pretty poignant moment. And he said further, he went, English is the language of prosperity the world over. Really, if you want to be rather successful in business internationally, it's difficult not to speak English and succeed. It's just the world over. We were blessed that kind of the, lingua franca is English. And he just made good points. And I said, I'm going to steal that line. My prosperity must be the language of prosperity. Because every child deserves the best chance possible to live their dreams. And the best way to do that is to make sure they are what? Proficient in the language. And not go with bilingual education. So anyway, I digress. But thank you for coming. I was very excited about the week, but particularly excited about today. Not because it's the last day of the week, but I get to do town halls in Rockwall and in Grayson. And Grayson is where I hail from. Rockwall is what I fell in love with over the last year. Because everything here has support, and it's a community, and it's a family. And it has a giant moat that separates y'all from Dallas. That really helped me understand the mentality, Jim, of Rockwall in the county. When one night I stayed over at the Hilton last year, and I was staring at that beautiful lake, and I went, yeah, I get it. There is a physical separation. There might as well be a gate and men with spears saying, all right, who goes there? I want to share with you something that is unfolding right now, and of course it's Afghanistan. I was able to talk on the phone yesterday morning with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo directly. And he's an incredibly impressive person. Depth of knowledge, just an American treasure, quite frankly. And I didn't know what to expect because, the press portrays anybody that ever worked with President Trump. They're just yes men. They're just lackeys, yes men and women. They're dogs. They're ideologues. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was one of the most effective secretaries of state we have had. So I want to go over, while it's fresh in my mind, some things haven't even been shown on television yet. And it's very interesting when he's telling us things, and then the news cycle last night, it took 12 hours, and then the public found out. So how did we get here? Let's discuss that very briefly first. President Trump did make it clear that he wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. It had been 20 years. He didn't want to stay 20 more. But there's a big difference between the way his plan was working and how Joe Biden fumbled the ball and it all fell apart. And Secretary Pompeo went over it with me, which was, he said, we had a condition-based approach. Now, I knew that. But he said, so these were the conditions. And I wrote them down because I wanted to get them right. He said, first, the Taliban had to cut all ties with Al-Qaeda. Now, they also knew who they were dealing with. The Taliban are ruthless, murdering SOBs. And they know they lie. Thugs and criminals tend to lie. Ask any law enforcement officer, do criminals lie? Like they breathe. So they didn't trust them. What did President Reagan say? Trust but verify. So they just set the conditions, one of which was you have to cut all ties with Al-Qaeda. You cannot attack the provincial capitals. You're not going to run Afghan checkpoints. You're not going to, of course, kill Americans. And you're going to power share with the government. You're going to learn how to power share and do it very differently than you have over the years. If you don't do that, we're going to punch you in the face. Because the best language, the best English the Taliban understand is gun to them. They react to strength, and they react to weaknesses very differently. So he said they violated the agreement plenty of times. So it was a formula. He said it was secular. They would probe. They would violate the agreement. We would then send mostly Afghan troops on the ground, some American troops, with strong American air cover, and we'd knock the snot out of them. And then we would reach out, back channel diplomatically, say, you violated, that's what you get when you violate. They said, okay, we got it, and then they get back in line. You know how many Americans were killed by the Taliban in the last year and a half?
Zero.
None. Not one. Because they knew, as militant as they are, they don't want to die. They always want their brother to die, or someone else to wear the dynamite vest, but they don't want to die. And we were hitting them, and we were hitting them hard. It was working. We drew down from 15,000 American troops in Afghanistan to 2,500, and no Americans were attacked. There are triple the number of troops today, and it's chaos. So that was what Mike was saying. I think, objectively, I can prove that what we were doing was working, and he did it differently. And that is a good way to look at it. I mean, there's triple the troops here, and it all went to snot. They were worried about our equipment. The number one worry, of course, was American lives and the Afghan allies that have risked their lives for our troops over the last 20 years. They had a plan to evac them. But here's the thing, I got to tell you, I get furious about it. I'm not here to attack Joe Biden because he's a Democrat. I'm not. I don't think we need to look at actions. If he does something good, I'll say, hey, we killed bin Laden, a Republican won in office. That was a good singular thing that happened.
I bet it was a Republican that pulled the trigger.
Oh, I can guarantee you. And gave them cover.
Yeah, but Biden
I love
was
Rockwall.
against it.
Trump was against the right.
Yeah.
Biden was against it.
Yeah, I know. I'm not, listen, he was one of the worst presidents we've ever had in history.
Yep.
I'm just saying, I'm not going to just de facto criticize somebody because they have a deep opinion. They do a very good job of it themselves. But in Afghanistan, it is a mountainous country. It's arid and it's unforgiving. It gets very hot in the summer. It gets very cold in the winter. One of the worst places in the world to conduct warfare. So the Taliban, it's been seasonal fighting for centuries. They start fighting in the spring, and they end it in the fall. And in the winter, they go to Pakistan to rest and recoup, and we can't quite reach into Pakistan. That's why they do it. They have refuge there. So the worst time in the world to pull out of Afghanistan is in the summer. You do it in the winter, when they're not there. Or most of them aren't there, because you have a fragile government and a very young, largely untested military. You give them 3 or 4 or 5 months to gain their footing, to gain confidence in themselves, and so the people can then be confident with them, and that gives them, I would think we would all agree, a much better chance, not a guarantee of success, but a far greater chance for success. And what did he do? He pulled out in the summer. And why? Symbolism. He wanted our troops out before the 20th anniversary of September 11th. People die when you choose symbolism over substance. And we're we're seeing it unfold right now, and that's why he's got to own it, and he's trying to push off blame on everybody else. Ladies and gentlemen, when CNN and MSNBC are tearing up the Democratic president, that's Jimmy Carter 2.0 business. He's got to own it, and he didn't want it. And then, so talk about being the path of vision. I've got a question. Picture if it was President Trump in office in the same exact conditions. Afghanistan collapses, the military evaporates, the president flees, and he's on vacation. And then he refuses to come back. What the media would have done. And then when he comes back, he makes a statement, pushes blame off on everyone else, doesn't take any questions, and what does he do then? Goes back on vacation. They would have skewered him, and rightfully so. And Biden tried that formula. He's so used. You ever play a soft pitch, a slow pitch softball? He's so this. And he can hit those. He sees it barely, but and then suddenly they're throwing 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Hey, what are you doing? And he gets angry. It's not my fault. No. Well, I thought you all loved me. I thought I was the second coming. No, you're in incompetent mode right now. You're getting our people killed. You're getting our allies killed. So it's bad on the ground. And as a member of Congress, we're supposed to be an equal branch of government, the legislative branch, to the executive. We're asking simple questions. How many people do we have on the ground? How many military members do we have there? What equipment is left there? Any plan to get it out? You know what we're getting? Nothing. Crickets.
Congressman, it doesn't matter what news channel we watch, 75% of those Taliban people walking around in Kabul are walking around with American M4 carbine.
Right. So, but when you ask a reasonable question, so you can do your job better and report to your bosses with transparency what's going on, and you get ignored, and by the way, my Democratic colleagues are being ignored if they ask inconvenient questions as well. That's not the way government in this republic is supposed to function. And we have to call any president to account when they do that. So the best we can tell, this is the situation. We have between, and it's an educated guess, 5,000 to 7,500 troops on the ground. The Turks have 800. The Brits have 400. We think the French have 300. The equipment is in the billions of dollars. And President Trump, this is what Mike Pompeo told us. You can just hear President Trump telling him, but when we pull out, go stick equipment inside. Every single bullet, the one you can for. And if none of it's going to fall in, gentlemen. You understand? And he said, and that's what his focus was. No American left behind, no ally left behind, not a bullet, but a Taliban. And instead, we have chaos. The Taliban right now today is in possession of more Black Hawk helicopters than the nation of Australia. And that's, now they don't know how to fly them yet, but they're going to sell them. They're going to sell them to Iran. I would imagine probably a few of them will be attempted to be reverse engineered in China. Okay, then we give up Bagram, which is an air base, you know, talk about strategically located, so close to Pakistan, so close to China, so close to Russia. It's gone. Should have held Bagram. So you fumbled it in every capacity you possibly could. But what makes me even more concerned is the British let's just assume we have 7,500, which we probably do. The British are going outside the wire and getting their people. Yep. They picked up some Americans. Now, we knew that yesterday morning. We didn't know about them picking up some Americans. We found that out last night.
So are the French.
Thank you. The French are going out. Let me say it again. The French are going outside the perimeter and getting their people. And Americans are hiding because we have bad leadership. We got the best military history's ever known. We need to use it. Because I suspect Biden the administration is back channeling and saying how much does it take? How much is it going to take? And the Taliban, they'd love a few extra $1 billion. And heck, what I've just seen, we burned 6,000 billions just recently. What's another 30? Into that evil regime. So let's talk about who they are. This is the regime that when they found women in possession of books, would take them to the soccer stadium, put an AK-47 to their head, and pull the trigger. You don't get much more brutal than that. They're just not on the Mao or the Stalin or the Hitler scale because they don't have the technology and manpower to be that evil. And then they tried to obfuscate and say, well, this Taliban, the administration floated this, it didn't work. This Taliban's different from the Taliban of 9/11.
Yeah.
Worse. It's the exact same Taliban from 9/11 with the exact same crew and most of the same leaders.
That we return to.
Yes. And that's what's frightening. So there's other implications than just, and these are important ones, than, oh, how many Americans are there? We think 15,000? We don't know. And we're relying on the Taliban to provide them safe passage and good conduct? They'll do it for money, like any other mercenary do.
They'll take the money and
Well, if they do that, I think a lot of people in this room are going to get rifles and get on some planes. And because it gets to a point where you just can't stand here in the country. You can't have 15,000 Americans butchered. That's when every member of Congress should be drawn up impeachment articles.
Yes.
So it's not just what's happening in Afghanistan that's bad. It's the geopolitical implications of what's happening in Afghanistan that is also very bad. The narrative from the Russians in Moscow and the communist Chinese in Beijing is America is a country in decline. Now they just have to turn their cameras on. They don't even have to spin it. They just show it. See? See? We're not even going to say anything. Look. What does that do to our allies? I have a colleague of mine that was in Eastern Europe a few days ago while this was unfolding. And you know what he said? The Czechs were pulling him aside. I'm talking about the people that run that nation, our NATO ally, with the Russian bear at their doorstep. Are we next? Reasonable question to ask. Are they?
Who's
Lithuania,
worried? The
Latin.
Taiwanese.
Pardon?
The Taiwanese.
I bet to that
I'll
too.
bet you the
Sir, don't
Chinese-
steal my thunder! Absolutely. But it's not just, what about the Ukraine? All of Eastern Europe. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are brand new countries again. They breathed about 2 decades of freedom between the wars, and then they became part of the Soviet Union. Again, they were part of the Russian Empire. They're finally free, and they're doing pretty darn well. And they want to keep it that way. But there's very few people that live in those 3 tiny little countries. Putin wants to swallow them back up. He swallowed up Crimea. He'll do it again. So, Taiwan, I spoke directly with the Taiwanese ambassador. It helps to be on the Armed Services Committee. It's great. I mean, it's the people that you get to interact with. And I'm a complete nerd about all the foreign affairs and what have you. And I spoke to her and I said, I am a big supporter of the president saying, we will protect Taiwanese sovereignty. Make it the Biden doctrine. If it was, I wish President Trump was in office, it could have been the Trump doctrine. To simply say, we will not sit idly by and let Chinese communists cross the streets. And sovereignty is a key word. We're not saying independence. We're not escalating the situation. We're saying sovereignty. The status quo of the last 70 years, which is de facto independence anyway. It doesn't matter. And she obviously was very supportive of that. But I'm one member of Congress. I'm not in the executive branch. But that's what you should do to show strength. Because the Chinese, we get a lot of classified briefings on armed services. We've had one on Afghanistan way back in February. And I did some of those interviews. I saw one of the clips, and we were saying just what had happened. That's what we were fearing. I can't get into specifics of what they tell us in the classified briefings, but I can tell you in general, we were very concerned. We're also very concerned about China's intentions. And the best we can ascertain, what the Chinese are counting on is American division and malaise. And then they will become the preeminent power in the world, and then eventually the only superpower economically and militarily. They would like to avoid a hot war if they can have that same outcome, even if it takes longer. They're very patient. Look what they did with Hong Kong. They signed a 99-year lease with the Brits in 1898, like no problem. And look, it's up. You know, they're patient. They want Taiwan back, and they want it back now. They've waited long enough in their view. If they think we're not going to defend Taiwan, they're going to cross. That's why some kind of a doctrine like that shows strength that we can, I think, all support, will show them if you do it, you have a hot conventional war with the United States of America. 99.9% chance they will not cross the straits if they're sure we're coming. So why hasn't he done it? Are you sleeping easy tonight if you're a citizen of the Ukraine in Kiev? If you're in Taipei? If you're in Eastern Europe? What we're teaching our enemies are we're weak, and our allies that we're treacherous. Our office right now is working on, specifically, I think now, 5 cases of Afghan interpreters, trying to get them out, where they had literally saved American lives, and we need to get them out. And almost every member of Congress is doing the same. Why wasn't that? There's no contingency, there was no planning. And then we're asking him for, okay, now things are what they are, what's your plan? Still nothing. So it's not good. I hate to start a town hall like that, but I needed to let you know what the heck's going on, and that's what's going on.
So what's the Armed Services Committee doing to change the dynamic?
So the Armed Services Committee, we're not in session, obviously, we'll be in session on Monday. It's run by Democrats. In short, answer to your question, as a committee, as individual members trying to get SIVs out, and obviously Americans involved. But we don't have the tools for a legislative branch, that's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, not to debate it, but for example, defense spending. Why are we allowing the Navy to, if we're worried about Taiwan, why are we allowing the Navy
Because the Democrats are in
budget
control.
to deteriorate?
In all
I understand.
No, because the budget was supposed to be, all right, so China announced, this is kind of like a foreign policy journal, but it's all right. China announced almost a year ago that they were going to increase their military spending by 7%. Now, some folks on the left will say that look at China's spending as opposed to ours, it's smaller. Yeah, because they don't pay their troops nearly as much. I'm talking about hardware and material, very starting to be comparable on par. So they're going up 7%. Quite frankly, I think we should go up 7% in defense spending to match. Because it's a lot cheaper, one of the generals told me. You know what's, you think that's expensive? You know what's expensive? A war. You know what's even more expensive? Losing that war. Afghanistan costs us $1 trillion. What defense spending is insurance. You buy insurance so you don't have to have a hot war. So it was going to be roughly, the proposed budget was $740 billion, give or take a few dollars, which was only going to barely match inflation. In fact, I think it was going to be below. And we lobbied for more. We got about 20, we don't know yet, but we think we're going to get 20 billion additional because the Senate Republicans just stood firm and some of the Democrats eventually caved. And to answer your question in a roundabout way, the Armed Services Committee is one of the last, it's got an inkling of bipartisanship in it. There's a lot of partisanship in that committee as well. And then I sit on oversight, and that's an absolute knife fight. That is it's pure partisanism. And that's okay. You know, I kind of don't mind that. Sometimes those fights have to be next to it is kind of fun. If we let our military deteriorate and China's continue to rise, we're going to end up spending so much more money. A hot war with China over Taiwan, $20 billion is nothing compared to what the investment was. And we're already deficit spenders to begin with. So we need to project that strength in the So I don't disagree with this administration. I do. Particularly when they spend $1.9 trillion on a COVID relief package that we did not need, when we had trillions that were left unspent from the legislation was passed last year before I got into Congress. And 1.9 trillion is 1,900 billions. 1,900 billions they spend that we don't need, and they haggle over 20 or 30 billion for defense spending? And don't even get me started with the nuclear triad. I can't tell you because it's all classified and it's specific. Suffice to say, it makes my stomach churn. And that wouldn't cost much to fix. So, we are where we are. But I want to just, go ahead, Jesse.
What about the invasion at the southern border? I mean, that's
Well, I'm
literally-
getting to that.
That's
Yeah.
literally an invasion. Why do we send the troops down there, light it up, and they won't come anymore? Because the Biden administration is bringing voters and then flying around the whole country. That's what he's doing. And
To the
the
Dallas
Republican,
Convention Center.
the
I wish we
Republican
could have-
Party needs to
Yeah.
realize, I was a lobbyist. I was in D.C. for 35 years. I know the game, I know the budgets, I know the people. I'm telling you, they're nasty. And that's what the Democrats are doing. They're bringing voters over the border.
I hear you. I hear you. We
And
have
flying them everywhere.
I hear you. Yeah, I wish several people in this audience were serving in Congress beside me, because you get it. So I'm going to touch on the border. I'm going to give a big portion of it. And we also will have a Q&A portion after that. So when I got there, the first piece of legislation, one of the first pieces of major legislation that folks, or the Democrats wanted us to consider, was H.R. 1. And you can tell by the number that it was the top priority. Why? Beyond the spending, beyond the border, beyond Afghanistan, because if you can control the elections, you control the country for the rest of our lives.
They already stole this past year.
Well, again, with H.R. 1,
They stole the election.
I know, we're going to have Q&A later. All right, my parents are school teachers. So we're getting there, we're going to get there. Because your voices are important. So this is what H.R. 1, some of the specifics that the press didn't want to tell you it did. Voter ID, it federalizes state elections. That's not what the founders intended. They said specifically in the Constitution, each state will determine how presidential elections are selected. They will also determine when, if you're a felon, convicted felon, when and if you will ever get back your voting rights. You know who determines that? The states, not the federal government. It says it in the Constitution. But H.R. 1 apparently is unaware that a document was written in 1788 that we refer to as the Constitution. No voter ID. If someone donates $200 to your campaign, the federal government will match it times 6. That's fundamentally un-American. If you, sir, want to donate $200 to me, sure. Under H.R. 1, if it was passed into law, $1,200 more out of the Treasury would come to my campaign. We should not compel Americans to donate to candidates that they don't freely choose to affiliate with.
You got 200 to match.
No, we're not.
They want to go to all mail-in ballots, just like Oregon. You think they're ever going to elect a Republican governor in Oregon with all mail-in ballots? It makes it so much easier to cheat when people are mail-in their ballots. To do universal mail-ins is a joke. All right. They also wanted to do felons. As soon as they got out of prison, they voted.
Yeah, in prison they vote.
Well, that's another one. I'm getting to that too. You all, were you at the other town halls? And then,
always trying to do.
Just well educated.
yeah, no kidding. No more state legislatures drawing lines during redistricting. It will be done with independent commissions, all 50 states. On the surface, it doesn't sound that egregious until you understand what independent commissions are. California does it that way. There are about 36% of Californians vote Republican in presidential elections. So let's, for our purposes, say a third. So they have 53 members of their congressional delegation. A third of that should be about 18, 17 members. You know how many Republican members were out of California before this last November election? 6. The Independent Commission drew lines that produced 47 Democrats and 6 Republicans in California. The state of Massachusetts doesn't have any Republicans. 9-0. And they have a third of their people voting. So they should have 2 or 3. I get that might not be 3 exactly. Maybe it's 2. Not even 1. That's how greedy they are. But, so it's a bad bill. It passed the House. The only reason why it's not law is because the Senate filibuster. And we should all pray tonight for Joe Manchin.
Hallelujah.
And then, but I want to tell you about some of the amendments that just barely fit. One of them was from our friend Cori Bush from Missouri,
Oh my gosh.
squad member, proud squad member. She filed a legislation, or an amendment to that bill that said felons whilst incarcerated get the vote. Convicted rapists, murderers, child molesters, while they're serving their time, can vote. I personally think violent criminals should never have the right to vote again unless pardoned. But that's not what the state of Texas has decided to do. So I think if we'll talk to our state legislature.
What do they do in Texas?
Okay. Once they serve their time. All the time. But Cori Bush wanted them to vote while incarcerated. Anybody here want to I don't know, work the polls on death row. As absurd as that legislation was, and that's why the press ignored it, because they knew the middle, the independents, would hate that. Any reasonable person, even reasonable Democrats, would hate that. Imagine Ted Bundy, the day before they executed him in Florida, voted. That's the scenarios that she was supporting. Now, it failed. The amendment did fail. Every Republican voted against it. And a slight majority of Democrats joined us and voted against it. But 100 out of the roughly 220 Democrats voted for it. I think the exact number was 97, 98. That's almost half. And look at the people that did. Younger, newer, obviously far more left-wing. That's the future of the Democratic Party. We are the thin red line that prevents that kind of tyranny taking over our country. And then I'm on the floor right before we were going to vote on H.R. 1 that day. And there was another amendment I was unaware of until I literally heard it being laid out. Ariana Presley from Boston, Massachusetts, another squad member. In fact, she's one of the original 4. She's up there laying out her bill. She said, her amendment, she wanted 16 and 17-year-olds to have the right to vote. I couldn't believe it. Her rationale was, well, these 16 and 17-year-olds are far more mature than all the 16 and 17-year-olds in history.
Yeah, right.
And your point exactly, Anderson.
Absolutely.
You mean the 16 and 17-year-olds that were getting up at 4 in the morning and working the farms, making ends meet for the family, while homeschooling? Or the ones that picked up rifles when our nation was at war? Audie Murphy comes to mind, fudging some paperwork. He's from Congressional District 4, that great American hero and treasure. These 16 and 17-year-olds are more mature than Audie Murphy. Okay. I had it. You hired a fighter. I had to act. I went up to Rodney Davis. The way the floor works on the debates, each side gets 30 minutes. So, and we can manage it any way we want. The manager that day was Rodney Davis. So he can speak for 30 minutes if he wants, or he can share the time. Usually you share the time. 1 minute for you, 2 minutes for you, that kind of thing. And I wasn't on the docket to speak. And I went up to Rodney and said, Rodney, can I have 1 minute? And he fudges some numbers. All right, Pat, I'll give you a minute. I said, thank you. So now I got to write it. So I run into our cloakroom. I write my remarks, and they have to be 1 minute or less. And then I have to time it to make sure it was. And I come back out, and he recognized it. And roughly, this is what I said. I find it interesting that our friends across the aisle just yesterday wanted to ensure that 16 and 17-year-olds that commit adult crimes, murder, rape, child molestation, etc., are tried as juveniles. But now they want those same juveniles to be able to vote. Terribly inconsistent. That part made Tucker Carlson. And then, beyond that, 50 years ago, our society agreed that the age of consent was going to be 18. It used to be 21. They lowered it because of Vietnam War. What we should have done, incidentally, back then, was say 21, unless you're active duty military, then you can vote. That would have been great. But we didn't. So we're at 18 now. Wish it was 21. And then I looked at her and I said, and the reason she gives is these 16 and 17-year-olds are more mature than any other 16 and 17-year-olds in history. And I looked at her and I said, have you seen TikTok? Fortunately, that amendment also failed. But about 100 Democrats voted for it. And to add salt into a weird wound, Cori Bush went on Twitter and her amendment about letting felons behind bars vote. She said, we failed, but we got 100 votes because we are committed to tearing down every single vestige of, wait for it, white supremacy. So according to Cori Bush, you're a white supremacist if you don't want crooks and thugs that were convicted duly in a court of law while they're incarcerated to vote. That's who we're talking about here. That's the future of the Democrats. I know. Makes me kind of sick to my stomach. But the infrastructure bill Joe Biden started was $2.25 trillion, and he said we had to spend every penny of it. We needed it all. It wasn't a want, it was a need. And the exact magic figure was $2.25 trillion. Now we knew he pulled it out of thin air. And then you can prove it because suddenly when he didn't have the support for it, it became 1.6. He kept negotiating against himself 1.4. Now it's 1.2. And I'm really appalled that 19 Republican senators voted for that garbage.
Who are there?
Yeah, I guess
Oh, there's a
they
list.
are.
There's going to be some Republicans in the House. Some indicated on a conference call we had with the caucus that they'll, under certain conditions, depending on how it's framed, they're going to vote for it.
How would
they
you want to
did.
see it changed before you can vote for it?
Uh,
What would they have to do?
The number would have to collapse. We don't have the money. We are deficit spenders now.
Well, actually, what I was trying to get at
Sure.
is, what pieces of it would you? to
Well, how
remove?
about, let's start with being a real infrastructure. That would be a great start.
I'm talking
That-
about the bipartisan one, not the other one.
Right, well, the other 1.2 trillion, I want it to be spent, if we have an infrastructure package, on infrastructure. Roads, bridges, waterways, broadband internet, things of that nature, real infrastructure. Not, and there's some interesting loose definition of what infrastructure is nowadays, not on universal pre-K, climate action, climate justice. I'm not sure what climate justice is. I was unaware that the weather was racist.
Communism.
Caregiving, climate guidance, again, I don't know what this is. Affordable housing, police accountability, and paid leave. And one Democrat said, and I hope with satire, even expanding the Supreme Court is infrastructure. So how about it just being real infrastructure? I don't want to bait and switch the American people. If it's going to be COVID relief, it should deal with COVID relief. Why did 91% of it not deal with COVID relief? The original proposal for 2.25 trillion, 93% of it wasn't about infrastructure. It was about socialist wish list spending. So just call it what it is. We can have our arguments, we can have our fights, we can have our partisan debates on what is valuable to spend. I tend to believe that we should start talking about a balanced budget amendment, which almost passed 20 plus years ago. By one vote in the Senate, it failed. It needed a 2/3 threshold. One vote, and it would have been kicked to the states. One vote. And now no one's talking about it. We desperately need to, because with this new spending that has occurred since COVID, the debt payments are going to be $1 trillion. You know what we could do with that $1 trillion? We want to talk about fixing infrastructure. If we didn't have, in a perfect world, we didn't have a debt payment, we'd have. Every child could go to college or go to a trade school for free.
Well, if we
With
back
$1
out all
trillion.
the parts that you're talking about, how much would the remainder cost? What you call hard infrastructure?
How much would it cost? It depends on who's proposing it.
No, I'm talking about in the current bill.
I don't understand your question.
The current
Right,
bill.
and if we could refrain from questions at this juncture, it would be helpful, because we have an entire area to do that. Sir, what's your question?
So of the 1.2 roughly billion,
Trillion.
trillion, if we backed out the things you were just discussing, what's left would be hard infrastructure.
Yeah, oh, that would be in the neighborhood of, we had to add it up, a couple $100 billion. Much lower than it is now.
That's
Much
what I was
lower.
getting
Yeah,
at.
and that's something that you can take a look at, get constituent input, get expert input, get colleague input, because roads and bridges are good things, dams are good things, and you want to talk about something that's expensive? A dam that breaks. People's lives are at stake, that kind of stuff. We're going to have some spending like that. But we have enough darn money. We've never had a revenue problem at the federal level. We've had a spending problem at the federal level for just going on 60, 70 plus years, because politicians like to make promises to get votes, and they do it with money. You can, well, yeah, but you've seen it at the local level. With Dallas, with the packages they gave their police officers a few years back that were unsustainable, and then they had to pull them back. I want to be honest with our young people. Do you think they're going to get the same Social Security deal that folks that are collecting now are getting? Absolutely not. We don't have the money past 2035. Yeah, they might get an equivalent of like $50 a month in today's cash. Let's just be honest with them, so they can save separately themselves while they pay into a system. Because Social Security worked when you had roughly 5 people pulling a wagon and 2 people in the wagon. And they were very deservedly in that wagon. They paid in, they were older, that kind of thing. But now, on check left unfettered, it's going to be 2 people pulling the wagon and 5 in. You can't do that. So these are some of the big things that we have seen. And so let's talk about the border real quick, and then we'll go to Q&A. I visited the border several times this year. Last time I was with President Trump. And you see this border wall that's got giant holes in it. The border wall is paid for. It should be finished. It was paid for. A wall like that works to some degree to help mitigate. We're always going to have people sneaking into the country. We're a free country. People want to come here. But do you want a trickle or do you want a flood? That's the difference. We have a flood right now. And I've asked on Facebook, I asked liberal friends of mine, hey, explain to me how, if you think COVID is a serious threat to the country, and I don't think COVID's anything to be trifled with, why we don't allow one person to come from Europe, legally right now, or Canada, but you just let 1.1 million people cross the southern border and we don't even know who they are. They're coming from countries that don't have vaccination rates to speak of at all, probably less than 1%. We're not testing them for COVID. When we do and they're positive, we still let them come into the country and release them. Defend that, please, because I'm just confused. So the first time we went to the Donna holding facility. They used to be called cages when President Trump was in office. Now they're holding facilities. And under Biden's own policy, his COVID protocol said only 250 people would be in that tent or in that facility at any given time. That day that we went, there were 5,700. I was physically, personally there, present with another 9 members of Congress. And then the Border Patrol and Customs do a great job. And if we let them do their job, we would have a trickle and not a flood. But we had their arms behind their back. So they gave us a great briefing about what we were going to see. And we were about to go in. And then there was this gal that looked very out of place. And she said, and she started barking orders at us. You will not take photos in this facility. You will not bring your cell phones in, and you will put those phones in the receptacles that you see right here. So then I took my phone and went, oh. I took a picture of her, I walked by her, and I walked in and recorded as much as I possibly could. I never stopped doing it. You're paying for all of it. It's our country. My job is to be transparent to every person that I represent. If you ask questions, I need to give you the best answers possible. And what we saw was atrocious. In one pod, there were supposed to be 32 kids in there. They roughly separated by age, because you don't want 15-year-olds with 6-year-olds, that kind of thing. There were 500 kids stacked on top of one another. Is COVID a concern or not? Talking about super spreader, there it is. So why do the drug cartels love mass unlawful migration? There's 2 main reasons, and they both deal with money and their profits. The first one is they love it when half of our border patrol and customs is busy changing diapers, babysitting, administering COVID tests, herding people onto buses, getting them to the airport, on our dime, by the way, flown all over the country. They love it because it makes it much easier for them to smuggle in their drugs. Ask the DEA, are fentanyl seizures up? Yes, to record highs. Cocaine, methamphetamine, all up. You know, one thing that's down is heroin because of fentanyl. Cheaper, more potent, more powerful, more profits, easier to transport. Fentanyl is, I believe, 50 times more powerful than heroin and 100 times more powerful than morphine. That's some spawn of Satan business right there. So the cartels make plenty of money, more money there. Second way they do it is most of the migrants, now these migrants are coming from all over the world, 70 plus countries, mainly right now from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. 3 countries that have a combined population of roughly 34.5 million. An inexhaustible supply of human labor. Well, the cartels go to these very, very indigent people. I mean, they're broke, very poor countries. Say, don't worry if you don't have money. We'll pay for the transit. We'll get you to America. Once you're there, you tell them you've got family in Baltimore. You tell them that you need to go to Seattle. They have it. And the collateral is the people back home. They'll harm them if they don't do their bidding. So the cartels make money. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Indentured servitude is back in America. 1 million people. I'm not saying every single person is an indentured servant that crosses the border illegally, but there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and that's moral outrage. I don't see a lot of folks.
What about child sex trafficking?
Well, that's what I'm getting to it. That's the next thing. It's the largest human smuggling and sexual trafficking operation history has ever known, subsidized by the American taxpayer. Go down to McAllen, you will see, I saw it on the plane that I left on, mostly illegal migrants being flown into the interior of our country. Biden administration won't tell us how many, they won't tell us who's paying for it, they won't tell us how much they cost, they won't tell us where they're going. I saw on the things, they give them these manila envelopes and it says, I can't speak English, can you help me get to this flight? And I was looking on some, I took some pictures. It was all over the place. Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, everywhere. Why are they doing this? It's bad for the folks making the transit when 30% of the women that migrate from southern Mexico and Central America are raped along the journey or sexually assaulted. We don't ever know the exact number, but and it's a lot of it's from like Huffington Post and other liberal outlets. It's a tragedy and it must stop. And the way to stop it is migrant protection protocols, also better known as the Wait Mexico policy, completing the border wall, and upping deportations, particularly of the criminals that prey on their own people. That fellow that murdered Kate Steinle about 4 or 5 years ago was a 6-time convicted felon. And the San Francisco jury let him off because he fit into their warped narrative. And that 32-year-old woman died. And he said that the gun accidentally went off that he naturally found in a crowd. That's the very definition of involuntary manslaughter, is it not? He got off. And he's still in the country, as far as I know. But he's still alive. The press never told you that part about him being a 6-time convicted felon.
Yes,
Did
they
they?
did.
Did they?
The news I listen to, they
Well, yeah, because if you're listening to real media, but did the mainstream media, did CNN? I never read it on CNN. So that's where we're at with the border. It's not good, and it's got to change. 212,000 people in July. To give you context, it was 43,000 in July of 2020. So it's 5 times worse under Biden than it was Trump. We're going to take questions.
All right. Let me see if we can get through these. First one, what can you do to stop me from losing my defense sector job due to vaccine mandates?
When you're in the minority in the federal government, it's tough to accomplish anything because you're simply ignored. More so than probably any other time in history. And when they're ignoring their own party, it's tough. All of these fights are hard. But it doesn't mean we do nothing. It doesn't mean we stay silent. It still doesn't stop me from going to the mountaintop with a megaphone and sharing the truths. Trying to, with the megaphone, and the megaphone is when you can get on and talk about it in the media, because that's mass communications. Now, we have our own social media, but if I can go on OAN, Newsmax, I'll go on any outfit that'll have it. CNN doesn't want to have it. Not only do you disagree, but they'll have you on if they think you're a buffoon, if you're a conservative buffoon, that they can make money, because they see they're all like that.
The White House, the CDC, Pfizer, the FDA, they don't require it.
Oh, look, the Democrats in Congress don't want us to have voter ID. HR 1's proved it. Let me show you something. This is what we vote with. Every member of Congress has one. I never saw one until I got one. But it's got the seal of Congress on the back. What's this? It is a voter ID. It's photo ID. No member of Congress can vote without a photo ID, and yet they want you to make sure that you can't, or states can't use that same criteria. It's madness. So I have requested, we filed legislation to outlaw mandatory testing or vaccination cards. It will get nowhere. I'm just being honest and frank. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not going to get anywhere. Nancy Pelosi is making us wear masks on the House floor again. And why I take such I have such violent opposition to this, is it sends the exact wrong message to the American people. 95% of members of Congress are either vaccinated and or they have had COVID and have natural immunity. I'm in both categories. On the House floor, only members can be on the House floor with a few selected staff. Why are we wearing masks on the House floor? That is way beyond herd immunity of 70%. We should be showing folks this is what can happen when we can get past COVID. Show leadership, not fear. Let's use science. So I'm refusing to wear a mask on the House floor. I know, Judge, there's 2 things I'm not going to die of. Sharks and COVID. Because I don't swim in the ocean. And she's going to fine me my entire pay for that reason. Because she cannot constitutionally prevent me from voting on the House floor. But apparently, I don't think she has the legal authority to fine me. But they're taking it out of your check. So I'm shifting all of my withholdings to pay my taxes in full. All of my salaries going to taxes. And I'm leaving $10. So she'll fine me about $6 a month. And it'll take roughly, I think, 13,000 years to pay the fine.
All right, let's talk about this one. Our cities and are our cities and counties of less than 50,000 population going to receive any COVID relief funds? If so, what requirements or specifications are in place for using those funds?
I've been talking with, with 18 counties, most of which, obviously Rockwall's not, but most of the counties are under the 50,000 threshold in our district. They're asking very specific questions about where, when, how they can spend it. Some of the guidance, as you know, is very vague. We're asking, and we're getting nothing. Silence. It's incredibly frustrating. This isn't like being in the Texas Senate when you rattle a saber and you get answers. This is just, you get ignored. So we're going to continue to try. If you have any specific questions, get with me and my staff, and we will ask the proper authorities and to see if we can get answers. And that's when, I got to get involved directly and make those phone calls.
Frank, I'm going to try and answer your questions here. You'll have to help me on the back. The second one, let's go one after.
You pick, that's why I put it in.
Okay,
You pick
all right, talk about earmarking, no work report, spending. What is the infrastructure, doesn't you touch on this a little bit? Can you talk a little bit more about the infrastructure bills that would directly benefit Texas citizens?
Can't hear.
Well, the first thing, I'll reread the question. First one was about earmarks. I will never file any request for earmarks. Just won't do it, ever. There's an appropriations process for a reason. If it's a worthy enough project, it will survive the appropriations process. I requested no earmarks. They're back now, and the House calls them community projects. They're earmarks. We're not using them. Not going to do it. Got some heat from some folks, but then, this is the way it is. I think it's wasteful spending and a detonation. As opposed to infrastructure package, again, I'm all for legitimate projects that we need. Not what we necessarily want, but what we need. And we have some infrastructure that's older. We have to replace it. It was a private enterprise, but you don't want to see something that happened like at Seaside, where the building just collapses. We don't need bridges to be collapsing like that either. Then we're a third world nation. So we need to look at that, but it would be a lot easier to spend money on needed infrastructure if we just didn't burn trillions of it on COVID relief. 18 months now, people don't have to pay their rent. And things of that nature, and then we ignore the folks, those that own the properties that could get foreclosed on. There are layers to the economy. Let's not focus just on one and have the government pick one as a leader.
Let's see here. Talk about, and again, some of these questions are related. So it's like what is being done to bring integrity back to elections. Talk about elections.
Let's talk about that
process
real quick.
And all that good stuff. By the way, you referenced TikTok. He referenced TikTok earlier. I said to him earlier that he got a TikTok exchange with one of the Democratic state representatives that was hanging out, and it was a very good exchange in terms of the drive-through voting, I thought.
Yes.
She's talking about 10 of those locations, if I'm not mistaken, in Harris County and heavily Democratic areas. So talk a little bit about that, and also just election.
So the way to approach election integrity is to do it state by state. You do not want the federal government getting involved in how states conduct their elections. Because when you do that, you get H.R. 1.
Shouldn't that be an amendment to the Constitution?
Well, I think the Constitution is rather clear on the topic to begin with.
But if the Constitution as it was written, if we had never passed the 17th Amendment, there would be 68 Republican senators in the United States Senate right now.
Oh, I know.
The 16th and 17th Amendment have killed this country.
And we are where we are at this point.
There's nothing you can do about history, but
But
it's just a fact.
I'm working on a time machine. I'd love to do it. But
Film that.
so Georgia did a great job. Florida did a great job. Iowa had already addressed these issues before the 2020 election. One of the reasons why there's a Congresswoman, Dr. Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican, who won by 6 votes. 6 votes. They didn't address the elections issues. She would have lost probably by several thousand votes. Nancy Pelosi is very upset about that election. Now, in Texas, they finally got quorum in the Texas House yesterday. Finally, after 6 burned weeks of nothingness. But, interestingly enough, the three of the Democrats that were derelict in their duties collecting $221 a day, living in D.C., they had the audacity and gall to testify in front of a United States Congressional Committee. Oversight. I'm on oversight. I wasn't on this subcommittee. So I requested to be, you can get essentially juiced in, guested on to the subcommittee. And I was told no. I asked again, I was told no. But it was unfair because the Democrats were being juiced in. They wouldn't want Republicans juiced in. So I ran into Jamie Raskin, who is the chair, pretty nice guy, uber liberal, but personally rather pleasant. And I ran into him on the sidewalk. And I said, oh, Mr. Chairman, my prayers have been answered. Here you are. I had a question. I noticed that 3 of the Democrats that are not on the committee, in fact, not on the committee at all, in the subcommittee are going to be requesting, are getting questions. Can I do that too? Because I know how much you respect the institution. And then he juiced me up. So you only get 5 minutes. But what they didn't know was because I knew the bill, and I knew the players, I knew all 3 Democrats personally because I'd served in the Texas House with them, that we were very prepared to ask good questions, and we've done a lot of research on it. So 4 of my Republican colleagues yielded their time to me. So they got me for almost 20 minutes. But at different points. Like it would have been great if I could have had all 20 minutes. It was 3 minutes here, 2 minutes here, 5 minutes here, that kind of thing. So here was one of the exchanges. Zifronia Thompson is a Democrat from Houston, been in the House for 50 years. And I said, Representative Thompson, you are from Harris County, are you not? Yes. From Houston, yes. Do you feel in your heart of hearts that the election in November of 2020 was conducted fairly in Harris County? Yes. Were you, you believe that drive-through voting, which is a new concept that 253 other counties in Texas didn't use ever, but Harris County decided they could do it. It's not in statute, by the way. And also 24-hour voting. You just vote all night. That's not in statute. No other the 253 counties do it. Anyway, Houston did. Do you think the drive-through voting was administered fairly? Yes. Are you familiar with Commissioner Precinct 1? Yes. Would you describe that as a Republican or Democratic area? And she said, blah, 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 she's a lawyer, blah, 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 blah. Finally, yes, it's Democratic here. 75 to 81% of the people who live in Precinct 1 vote Democrat. There were 10 locations that were set up for drive-through voting. 126,000 people voted in those drive-through locations. 5 of the 10 were located in Precinct 1. 4 of them were located just outside of Precinct 1 in Democratic neighborhoods. And 1 of the 10 was located in a clearly Republican area, the Humble Civic Center. So 9 out of 10 were deliberately put in Democratic areas by the democratically controlled Commissioners Court, and they do the elections and all. So you think that was fair? That's your definition of fair. Well, madam, your definition of fair leaves a lot to be desired. And then we moved on to the next question. I never saw the mainstream media talking about that or doing the research about that. And that's what they ran away for 6 weeks. And they called it Jim Crow 2.0. And I said, you know what I call it? Hyperbole 2021. That is ridiculous and it's a joke. So now they're back. I believe the bill should pass. I think it will pass. It better pass. And that's the way to address election integrity moving forward. Because if we don't believe in our elections, we will lose this republic.
Do you know anything about the audits that are coming for Texas?
I don't know. That's a state issue. I have no idea. That's the state legislature. But here's the bottom line is this. You will occasionally lose a close election. You will occasionally win a close election. Mariette Miller Meeks is an example. 6 out of 400,000 votes cast. The closest election for Congress in the history of the country. And of course, Nancy Pelosi was going to overturn it. But she didn't have the votes. Because if she loses, the governing majority is tiny. It's 222 to 213. If 5 Democrats don't agree with her and vote with all the Republicans, she loses the day. And they had at least 12 that were not going to vote to unseat Mariette Miller Meeks. I didn't even know you could do that. But yeah, it's up to essentially Congress to seat each of its own members.
Mr. Congressman, with all due respect, sir, 75 to 80% of Republicans believe the election was stolen. You can't have that kind of thing out there and have a united country at all.
That's why I support states that are passing election integrity laws. Because it doesn't make it harder to vote, it makes it harder to cheat. That's the deal. I would have, yeah, you show up in person, you have a vote, you have an ID with you, and then you vote. If you're infirmed, fine, but only if you're infirmed, not because you don't feel like it. And quite frankly, 65 and over, you automatically can vote by mail. Why? If you're extraordinarily healthy and you can do everything, why 65? I know a lot of people over 65 vote in person, but why is it automatic? It should be infirmed and infirmed only. If you're 75 and you're infirmed, you should be able to mail it in. If you're 45 and infirmed, you should be able to mail it in. That's me, but I'm in the state legislature. So.
However, if you have a computing machine hooked up to electricity and you cannot prove whether that thing's hooked up to the internet and vote swapping can happen, people are still not going to believe you have a free election.
What I believe and what I can prove sometimes are two different things.
Arizona's going to prove it today.
Well, I would be more than happy to see that, and I would love to, because then I always suspect that there was something there. I objected to the Arizona Electoral College, the votes, because, and I'll tell you exactly why I did. The Constitution clearly states the states will determine how presidential electors are selected. Nobody can deny that. So Arizona said, in a presidential election, you can register to vote up to 29 days before that election. After that, you can't. And the left had 4 years to register as many people as they thought would vote against President Trump. And then that wasn't good enough. They knew Arizona was going to be tight. So what did they do? They sued in court, and an Obama-appointed judge said, no, you know what? Doesn't matter what the legislature said. You can continue to register people to vote beyond the 29-day threshold. Now that was overturned, but not for another 10 days. In that time frame, 30,000 more people were registered to vote. President Trump lost Arizona, if you believe the results, by 11,000.
Same thing in Philly.
We need to push back. It's the legislature. It's not some county clerk that says we're just going to mail out ballots to everybody. That corrupts the election. Did President Trump lose? Maybe. But he didn't lose by this margins. Did he win? Maybe. We don't know.
I don't believe for a second.
Well, that's the thing. And if enough other people don't, the next time out, that's the danger. It's a slippery slope. I don't like it.
In Maricopa County, there's 74,000 more ballots came in than were sent out.
Congressman, this will also give us an opportunity for him to visit with some folks afterward before you slide out of the door, so appreciate you answering these questions. You've covered each of these topics. You touched on a little bit about Afghanistan, but let's close out, if we can. One of the comments at the end on Frank's comment was just thank our troops for their service. Also talked about, this question was, can you put pressure on or touch on, speak to our efforts of getting Americans out of Afghanistan, getting them back home?
Nothing could be more important right now. And quite frankly, if you had leadership, he went back on vacation. I mean,
that's amazing.
Should have never gone in the first place. And then to go back, and then, of course, they have so much heat to come back. It should be a bipartisan effort immediately to give any and all resources. Congress should have oversight on it, or at least be briefed on what's going on. And we should deploy, like Brian Mast, my colleague from Florida, I agree. Reverse course to some degree right now. Get enough troops on the ground where every single American can be extracted. The Taliban doesn't want to die. If they want to try to stop us, a lot of them are going to die. We got to get our people out. We got to get them out now. We cannot trust these people. You could pay them off and they'll say everything will be fine, and they could butcher them anyway.
Absolutely.
We don't know. We can't trust. But we're in this horrible position now. If the Brits and the French can go out and get their people with a sliver of the amount of troops that we have there, darn it, we can do it too. Let's get there and get them out. And then, with the special immigrant visas, for our Afghani troops, we can't do what we did in Vietnam. I'm sure there's Vietnam veterans in this room. We can't do to our Afghani allies what we did to our South Vietnamese allies. And look at the Vietnamese that eventually, the boat people that eventually made it to this country, look at the success story that they are as a whole, as a group, because they love liberty and they love freedom. And we have that in this country, and they knew what true tyranny was. The same thing with the Afghanis. We have to also be cognizant, be careful, to make sure we know who is coming out of Afghanistan. our allies, the ones that not prove themselves not with their words, but with their actions. And they'll be great Americans as well. But not just because you want to leave. We don't know you, you can't come. So that's what I think we should do. Do we have any other questions that are
Topic-wise, that's
okay?
Can't we send the armed forces down the border? I mean, legally, I know we can, because the Constitution says, hey, protect the country. Send them down there and say, you're not coming in. Line them along the Rio Grande, say, you're not coming in.
I like the approach that Governor Abbott has had of late to say, deploy the troops, arrest for criminal aggravated trespass. If people, well, President Trump's policy was the best. Wait, Mexico, just wait. Yeah, secure the border. We have the resources to secure our border. We don't have the will. That's an important distinction. Has Israel, who is surrounded by enemies, an ocean of prosperity and rule of law and democracy and a sea of tyranny, have they secured their borders?
Yes.
Yes, because they had the will. They knew they had to, or they'll die. Yes, sir.
Yeah, really appreciate all that you're presenting, and this is a small little sliver, but to me, it's just one of those pieces. It's not Afghanistan that's huge, it's not voter integrity that's huge, but there are people still apparently in solitary confinement.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
After the January 6th, I was there. It was a very peaceful. And when all the things I've learned about how Antifa and other organizations filtered into that, and anyway.
Yeah, so let me, and again.
Please let us know, what are you doing to help them get out of solitary confinement, get attorneys, etc. I mean, that's beyond the pale in my mind in living what we think is a free country.
Congressman, in related to this, I understand that Congress people cannot look at these people or have any kind of.
Oh yeah, they're keeping them isolated.
Matt Guest tried to do it, and so did Lauren Boebert from the 3rd District of Colorado tried to do it, and they were denied. This to me is egregious.
Do it again.
So we're not going to get to the, we'll know the full truth. Let's back up a minute. January 6th, I was right on the front lines, literally. I had a club in my hands. We didn't know who was on the other side of the door. It was chaos. Some of those folks were violent. Not most. Overwhelming majority were peaceful. But there were some that were violent. We can't deny that. And that's troubling. But we have a justice system for a reason. To treat folks that were largely arrested for criminal trespassing, and maybe theft of property, destruction of government property, to treat them as if they're serial killers. Or they have betrayed the country, or that they were involved in espionage, and they have to be in solitary confinement, is ridiculous. The punishment, the crime, the punishment, it's out of balance. I'm not saying people shouldn't be held to account for their actions. They should. And I firmly believe that. I wish that didn't happen that day. The crowd, part of that crowd, and it was a very large crowd, part of it became a mob. It did. I was there. And it didn't serve their purpose. It hurt their cause. But I find it interesting that the left wants to focus and obsess over one riot that lasted 4 hours in one building that caused $1.5 million in damage, and completely ignore the riots of BLM and Antifa in the summer of 2020 that swept over 140 cities, killed 5 times as many people, $2 billion in damages, and lasted weeks and months. There's no call in Congress to investigate and get to the bottom of those. Who funded them? Who bailed them out? We know the vice president, our current vice president, helped bail those criminals out. Can you imagine if Donald Trump bailed out, or at least tried to, some of the folks that got arrested for January 6th? So, real quickly, FBI Director Wray testified in front of the Oversight Committee. I got to directly question him. And I asked, of the 500 plus folks, Director Wray, that have been arrested for their actions on January 6th, because it's been called an insurrection by my Democratic colleagues, I firmly believe it was not an insurrection, it was a riot. How many people were arrested and charged with insurrection? His answer, none. Sedition, none. Treason, none. Anybody arrested for possession of firearms that entered the building that day? He said, yes, 1. And I said, well, Director, you're under oath. So you're testifying right now. Your testimony is that somebody was arrested with a firearm inside the Capitol that day. Oh no, I didn't say that. On the Capitol grounds, there may have been one. So he started to obviously split hairs. So nobody that day. I said insurrection. People want me to believe with a straight face that the republic, the greatest and oldest and strongest republic in history, was going to be overthrown by a few hundred folks that were armed with flagpoles, mace, and a stolen podium? It's absurd. But the left loves it. Oh, an insurrection. So they have, when we'll finally get to the bottom of it all, is after the trials are over, after the folks that are convicted serve their time, and they can get out and tell us what the hell went on with their confinement. Because we can't get to them. They're being treated as if they're Nazi war criminals.
It's such a violation of their constitutional rights.
Joe Biden, I don't know if he's ever read the Constitution.
They can't read anymore.
But that was my question, is that we have lawmakers going all over the country.
Your show, Congressman, but if we can, you've got to get.
And one more, and then we have a town hall, unfortunately, in Grayson County, so I wanted to wrap up in the back.
Yeah, I just had all these big issues of Afghanistan and everything. I'd like to bring down a little bit more personally to Social Security. I think a number of us in this room are probably recipients and beneficiaries of Social Security. It's going away, or it's going to be substantially reduced in about 15 or so years. Would you support, say, raising the cap on, and maybe even abolishing the cap?
Well, I thought you were going to say, I support raising the age.
Oh no, the age, I mean, that's all right. You and I can work till I'm 70. We do white-collar jobs. I've got friends who are in construction, who are welders. They're struggling at 60, 62. You know, so it has to be a sort of a income thing. So you're either raising the cap or abolishing the cap on incomes, or you're.
I don't support that. No.
You don't support that?
No.
Okay. What about in terms of the COLA? Now, I think there's a bill in Congress to change the CPI delta.
Well, yeah, the problem becomes,
CPIE.
to your question, when you have we've been fortunate over the last 2 decades or so to have inflation that was roughly somewhere between 2 and 4% a year. It's not 2 to 4% anymore.
Right.
When you inject trillions of dollars into the economy, prices are going to go up, and that serves a tax on every one of us. We all become less wealthy when things cost a lot more. You saw it with construction costs, you saw it with vehicles. I mean, COVID has something to do with that, but massive spending has something to do with it as well. It's kind of the Cobra effect. You try to mitigate something and you get more of it. With Social Security, the way I would do it is to say, well, keep our promises to the folks that are collecting it or about to collect it now. And to the younger folks, we have to be very honest with them. They're not going to get the same deal. And we're lying to them right now to say that they are. There's going to come a day with severe austerity if we continue the way on our course. Our debt to GDP ratio right now is almost 130%. Ireland, Spain, Greece had to go to austerity at far less than that. The only reason we have it is we're still the world's reserve currency. And why are we the world's reserve currency? Because of the faith and trust in what? The federal government of the United States. When we lose that faith, we'll lose that reserve currency status. China would love nothing more than to replace us there, and then we're going to have chaos. And then our Social Security, it's going to be wiped out because inflation will skyrocket, and we won't have the money. When you're spending $1 trillion on your interest payments, that's wasteful. And what we have done over the years is simply said, let's just pay off enough people to get enough votes to get the 51%. And some Republicans have been as guilty of that as Democrats. And then here we lie with, as you said, about 2035, we're wondering if Social Security is even going to be there anymore. But the way to do it, and this is really going back to something I wished there was one president that had enough capital when he came into office, and it was Obama in 2009. And I wasn't happy that he won. But yeah, I don't root against the United States, and I'm not going to root against presidents. I was really hoping he would do this one thing in particular. He had, what is the approval rates, like 75 or almost 80% at first, and they held above 60 for months, is to say, let's tackle some of these major issues in a bipartisan fashion with a bipartisan commission let's fix Social Security for the next 100 years. He could have done it.
You really believe that?
And he could have, but he didn't choose to.
You really
He
believe
didn't care.
Try?
Obviously he didn't try. History showed us he didn't do a lick on it. He punted on things that he could have fixed because he had that much capital, political capital, and he chose to do nothing. I think that was a dereliction to do. There's no doubt about it. One more, and then I'm wrapping up. Two more, and then I'm wrapping up. Sir.
All right, so you talked a little bit about the infrastructure bill.
Yes.
And I'm glad to hear you know there's a lot of really, really bad stuff in the infrastructure bill. It has nothing to do with infrastructure. It's basically a lot of Marxism, socialism.
Yeah.
And I know Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is starting this effort to try to get 100% of the Republicans to vote against this. Are you, and I know you're against it, are you going to work with her?
Oh, Marjorie's a friend of mine, yeah. I mean,
Good.
she's a freshman. MJT.
Yeah, the glorious MJT.
Yeah, she raised $3 million in her first quarter because the Democrats kicked her off her committees.
Oh, yeah.
And I jokingly went up to her and said, Marjorie, how do I get thrown off my committees?
Because I know she said that if these Republicans don't vote against this, I mean, because this is disastrous. This could almost be as bad as HR 1. If they don't vote against this, she's going to primary them out.
Well, so somebody asked a similar question in Delta County, up in Cooper. And they said, how do we get rid of these rhinos? Okay.
Amen.
And I answered it I like to be beyond honest, be very frank and candid, as if I'm sitting in your living room, you're in mine. Doesn't matter if we could agree on everything or most things, or disagree on everything. I'm just going to be as honest as I can with my heart. Okay. There, to me, are two types of Republicans that, let's take for instance the impeachment vote. 10 Republicans voted to impeach President Trump in January. I voted not to. I thought it was ridiculous. The guy was leaving office in 2 weeks. He did nothing to warrant it, et cetera, et cetera. But those 10 voted to impeach him. Not all Republicans are created equal. Not all Republican districts are created equal. Some of those folks, I really hope don't come back. But there are a few that beyond that vote, they've been pretty solid on other stuff. I'm very angry with them about that vote. But that vote has been taken and it's been cast and it's part of history and we move forward. But please understand that some districts aren't like Congressional District 4 of Texas. They're really narrow. And if we have a representative, say for instance, that is with us 65% of the time, that's not great, but it's not 4% if a Democrat were to defeat them. And we need, that person will vote to fire Nancy Pelosi come the January 2023. So there's that one type of Republican. But then there's another type of Republican that I want to touch on. It's the one that's in a very conservative district that sells their constituents out. There's a perfect example of that happened in the State House for years. I was in the State House for 6 years. In Central Texas, House District 59, there was a fellow named J.D. Sheffield. His district voted for President Trump 83%, one of the reddest districts in the state in the Texas House. He was the most liberal Republican in the Texas House. Voted with Democrats a whole bunch. And I could never understand how the heck that guy got elected in the first place and then continued to be reelected. And it's a bit of a formula. What they do is he goes down to Austin, and he parties out with the Democrats and colludes with them. But then when he goes back home, and he raises a lot of money by doing that, by the way. And all the special interests, he's basically coin operated. He gets a pile of money, then he sends out mailers like he's Barry Goldwater. Or he's Ronald Reagan. And people, people got lives. They see this. Oh, I agree with this. He had a picture. He was one of the most pro-choice Republicans, but claimed he was pro-life. He sent a picture out of a beautiful woman, 30 years old or so, like a model, with a baby in her hands. J.D. And he was a doctor. Dr. J.D. Sheffield, pro-life warrior. I mean, the piece was wonderful. It was gorgeous. But it was all phony. So the way we get rid of them is you got to recruit a wonderful candidate. You got to recruit a talented candidate that will work smart, will work hard, and that can expose who he really was. That occurred in this election. Yeah, and has guts. That occurred. We supported somebody. I endorsed her. Her name is Shelby Slauson. She beat him by 24 percentage points, and she was outspent 10-1.
When are you going to get rid of dog?
Oh, God, I can't get rid of Lloyd Doggett. It's horrible. Boston. Oh, it's awesome. They keep Boston weird. They're nuts. So I want to, but that's the point. The ones that are, they have no excuse whatsoever at all. They're not matching their electorate. They got to go. If they're matching the electorate, and it's kind of.
You think you'll be able to pressure them to match their electorate?
If not, it's up. I think Liz Cheney's in huge trouble in Wyoming.
Oh, thank God.
And she went off the reservation. Not only, like, she was obsessed with Trump, she hated him, whatever, and then she just wouldn't leave it. And when you're on, if you're a Republican and you're getting interviewed by CNN every day, there's something, yeah, there's something up there. You're doing their bidding. My job is to do your bidding. My job is to do Congressional District 4 bidding, Freedom's bidding, Liberty's bidding, Fiscal Responsibility's bidding, and my constituents' bidding. It is not to do the bidding of the mainstream media or the Democrats. It's just not. All right, I gotta run, but I know I'm getting now the cutthroat, not
Yeah,
the
big
this.
time. You're really getting
They
it.
give me sign language.
Yeah.
This is we gotta go. This is we're gonna kill you if you don't. So, but I really do want to, if I can, share a few parting thoughts, because we've talked a lot today about the issues and the problems that we have. We're going to have another town hall, by the way, in Rockwall County in November, December timeframe. So feel free, if you've got questions, please feel free to either ask us and our staff now or save them up and bring them. And we'll do a longer one too.
One thing on that, also, Virginia mentioned just a moment ago, before it goes into closing, anybody that has a question that you just really need it, and you get it, you know, they're very important, and he does want to make sure that he responds. Send an email to Virginia, right back here, wave your hand to Virginia. Her commitment is she'll get with him with that question, get him to answer it, spend the time to answer, come from him, not only send it back to you in response, but they'll put it on the website.
So Virginia is a Rockwall resident. She's our district director, and I believe she's one of the best, if not the best, district director in the country. So we could give her a round of applause. I want to speak to you from the heart real quickly and briefly. Civilization began roughly 9,000 BC. Well, I think the closest date they can guess is 9,600 BC, in a town called Jericho. Human beings decided the hunter and gathering lifestyle wasn't for them any longer. They were going to domesticate animals, plant crops, live, gain some common and joint security, and build a community. But every single person in the world in 9,000 BC or so lived at the end of a spear, because the strong man ruled. Your life was not your own. If that strong man with his warriors told you to do something, you didn't do it, you're going to get the business end of that spear. Every single human being. And it was that way for about 9,000 years, until a tiny spark was lit in the Aegean in Athens, 500 BC, where the Greeks got together and said, why don't we all decide how best to move forward? Foreign concept that we know now as democracy. But it was just a spark. And as most sparks do, it was snuffed out rather quickly. And for another 2,000 years, every single human being again lived at the end of a spear or at the end of a barrel of gun. Until another spark was lit in eastern Massachusetts by a flint musket in 1774. The shot heard around the world. Colonials decided that they were going to take on the greatest economic and military power of their day, the British Empire. If they fought that struggle again 100 times, they'd probably lose 100 times. But I firmly believe the hand of God interceded on freedom and liberty's behalf and on human spirit's behalf, and that spark that was lit became a flame. And the colonials won. And then it became a fire. And it began to spread. It didn't spread to every nation, but it spread across the globe. And every single person, every single soul that enjoys freedom and liberty today owes a debt of gratitude to that American colonial who pulled that trigger and lit that spark. And we can't ever forget that we are the descendants of our founding fathers. That torch is being passed to us. It has been. And then we will eventually pass it on to a younger generation. If you want to honor, think about where your ancestors were 150 years ago. 150, 160 years ago. They could have already been here. They might have been in Europe, Mexico, South America, Africa, Asia, anything. But almost all of it, we didn't descend from royalty and nobility. We descended from peasant stock. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a descendant of survivors of the bubonic plague. As are all of you. We will get through COVID. Think about how they lived and how they dreamed. They dreamed about what we have today. And they never achieved those dreams. I love it when there's a young, somebody brings their child to one of these. And you ask a 12-year-old to come up. They're so bony, and they're so skinny, and they're so frail, delicate. My story is not any more unique than anybody in here. I just know mine, which is my two-time great-grandfather was 12 years old when he left Ireland in 1848 with his 16-year-old brother. 12 years old. And his parents, in this moment, although it happened all those years ago, and through the distance of time, obviously we never knew each other, his parents put him on a ship, full well knowing that they'd never seen him. Most people in here have had children. Think about how gut-wrenching. But they did it because they feared they would die of malnutrition if they stayed in Ireland. They put their two sons on a ship, and the world was a very big place back then. They came to America. They didn't know anybody, they didn't have anything, and they weren't given anything. They worked the railroad their entire lives. I think it's quite fitting in a way. They died 3 months apart in 1900. They led a life. They enjoyed liberty and freedom and some limited opportunity. And they had children and families. And they successfully had it. So to sit here amongst patriots that care enough about their country to attend a town hall on a balmy Friday afternoon in August in Rockwall County, I have to think about it. And I think we all should think about our ancestors. Because you all have very similar stories. And they lived very difficult, tough lives. Lots of sacrifices. So we could be here today. So you want to honor your ancestors? Which we all should do. Live up to your full potential. Do everything you can in your power to lead a joyous, happy, generous life. Because when you do that, you make our country stronger, you honor your ancestors, you protect the legacy of our children and grandchildren, and you love thy neighbor. I want to thank you all again.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Congressman Pat Fallon is finished with his town hall today, and here right in Rockwall County at the lodge at Rotary Club Lodge, and he really talked about a lot of different things that really set the mood for what Congress is going on in Congress right now. And we're not going to be able to get an interview with him today, but the staff did say he'll do an in-studio interview, and so that's even better because we'll be able to have a good hour with him next time he's in the Rockwall area. So some of the things he focused on was Afghanistan. Obviously, that's the big and hot topic right now, and Afghanistan is top of mind. He talked directly with Mike Pompeo and what the president is doing to really screw the area up and our nation up. And obviously, there are a lot of people that are being hurt, especially Americans. And so he focused on that. He's on the oversight committee, and not a lot can be done from the oversight committee because they're not in session, first of all. And when the committee's not in session, the president really has full authority, and a special session has not been called. One of the issues that he also discussed was the invasion of America by Mexico, and he highlighted the fact that those who are outside of the country in any other country, Canada or Europe or what have you, they're not allowed to come in without strict without a visa, without the proper papers, and yet we're just opening the border in Mexico and allowing the COVID issue is just getting worse and worse. He did talk about, obviously, HB1 was the top issue for Democrats as they came into Congress, and they really focused a lot on trying to get the and I'll pan back to where Congressman Pat Fallon is still meeting with constituents after he has finished, but a lot of people realize that HB1, the election, basically federalizing elections and basically putting the federal government in control, and the fact that they want to take the redistricting right of states away from states into hand-picked committees of political appointees who are accountable to no one except the people who appointed them, is a disastrous idea, and will certainly it's disastrous for anyone who believes in liberty, who believes in the Constitution, because the Constitution is specific in how districts are drawn. They would have to basically override the Constitution to do something like that. So he focused on the right to vote for 16-year-olds, which is something that the Democrats are trying to push. And despite the fact that Fallon got on the House floor and debated that issue and focused on the fact that Democrats want to give those who murder, who are 16, give them the right to be treated and given they would be charged not as adults but as children. But while at the same time, the same Democrat who's pushing this bill is wanting them to give them the right to vote. So this is it's a pretty good argument that he made. 91% of COVID relief bill does not go to COVID relief. We're talking about over $1 trillion going to COVID relief, and 91% of that not going to COVID relief. It's insidious how big government liberals basically take over our federal government. And he talked about going to and visiting the what's now called holding facilities, but when Donald Trump was in office, they were cages. And he was able to take in his phone, and when they told him he couldn't, and he said, I'm going to take my phone in, and they couldn't stop him, and they didn't. And so it was an interesting dialogue. There are some things that I do wish he had talked about, but he didn't. Obviously, there are things that are important at every town hall, and the questions that I wanted to ask were not answered, and so I expect the office to work with us to get him on my broadcast. That way, I can ask these hard-hitting questions. One of the things that I thought was interesting, he said, "How do we get rid of rhinos?" Because that was one of the questions that people were asking, and he gave an example of a situation where he got a rhino out. How do you get rid of rhinos? Well, first of all, you watch shows like mine that identify Republicans in name only, people who call themselves Republicans and yet do everything but stand on conservative principles, and they do anything but uphold our party platform. We have some big rhinos. We had some in the room today, And they are celebrated because they have the money, they have the political clout, and they know how to work the system. But I've identified them, and I will continue to do so. So I think the best way to get rid of rhinos is to be informed, is to stay informed, and not believe the political rhetoric that goes around every time an election comes up, because that's essentially what happens. Some of the most liberal members of Congress, some of the most liberal people in Rockwall County, for instance, will put out mail and tell you how conservative they are. But unless you watch a show like mine where I highlight, here's what they do. They believe in bigger government. They believe in higher taxes, and what they say they believe doesn't come out. And so I think it'll be an interesting show, and probably we'll be doing a show next week, I believe, and we'll be focusing on one city that has raised its budget astronomically. It is going to raise the tax rate. It's going to be the only city in Rockwall County as I understand, to actually raise the tax rate. And it's not for needs. It's so that they can expand their staff, so that they can get more employees on the dole that will never be fired, that will put you on the hook. Those of you who live in that city, do you know which city I'm talking about? And what's funny is the person that made the motion to approve the budget and approve the tax rate is the very rhino. It's one of the biggest rhinos in Rockwall County. So it's something to watch for and something to look forward to. So I thank you for being with me today. I hope this has been helpful to be able to see Congressman Fallon and hear a town hall, see a town hall for yourself. A lot of people can't make it in the middle of the day. This was a town hall that was at 2:30, and so I hope that this enables you to see what your congressman is doing in Congress and how he is representing you. Obviously, the questions that you sent me that we wanted to ask, I couldn't. His time is just cut too short, and so he's not going to be able to talk with us today. But we're going to get him in studio. So I hope this has been great. I wish you the very best, and we will see you next time. May the Lord bless you, and you take care. There's the congressman. How are you, buddy? All right. Well, you're going to come in studio with me.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, we're coming to talk to Bunker Bob.
That's
He's
right.
a great American.
All right, man. You're a great American.
Hey,
God bless you,
brother.
man.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
See
All
ya.
right.
Sorry I didn't get
You be careful, okay? So anyway, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. May the Lord bless you, and we will see you then. So